Dobrodošli ljudi, počet ćemo i prebacit ćemo se na engleski jer ovaj panel će biti na engleskom. Tako da ujedno i obavijest svima koji su fizički u prostoru s nama i onima koji ste online. We are switching to English as of now. Welcome back to the continuation of our conference. This is our afternoon session. And we will be talking with our guests from Macedonia, from Serbia, and from Kosovo. Welcome Milica, welcome Ares, welcome Iskra. We are very happy to have you here with us today, and we're very happy that you could have joined us on pretty much short notice. So thank you. I guess that's one of the advantages of Zoom conferencing. Just for start, I would like to introduce our guests and myself. Our guests today are Milica Pekic from Belgrade, Serbia, who is speaking today on behalf of the Cultural Center Magazine. Hello, Milice. Welcome. Hi.
Hello to everybody. Great to see you all.
Then we have Iskra with us, Iskra Gešovska, who is from Skopje, Macedonia, who is speaking on behalf of the Cultural Center in Skopje and is also one of the founders of the Jadro Association of Networks. Hello, Iskra, welcome. We're very happy to have you.
And happy to see you.
And Ares from Kosovo, who is speaking on behalf of the Lombardi Foundation. Ares, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Birela. Great to be here. There.
Maybe one day soon we shall all meet live, but for now this will have to do in these special circumstances, which I'm sure that we are all eager to also discuss, to have a portion of our time devoted to discussion of these challenging times, especially concerning regional cooperation. But for now, I would like our guests to just give us a short introduction of their social, like these marks, social cultural centers, to give a short presentation of your centers, of the work of your centers, maybe give us a bit of a history how your centers came about, because this conference is, among other things, a conference devoted to the issues of social cultural centers, to the issues of governance models. So if you would like to give us a short presentation of your centers, Milica, since you're already unmuted, I will use this opportunity to ask you to maybe talk a bit about Magazine.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Cultural Center Magazine actually has now already quite a long history. It was a warehouse or storage space for one printing company in the center, in the very now area that is growing in its commercial value. It's area of where a new project, Belgrade on Water, is being built for the past several years, close to the Sava River, close to the rivers, so all part of the city. So this warehouse was space of one public company, and it was abandoned for years. And in 2007, just to give you a brief history, I would try not to speak too long about it, but since 2007, the independent cultural scene of Serbia, from various, on 2007, several organizations active on the independent scene were actually entered the discussion with city, and this space was dedicated to those few organizations selected on the open call that city made, but actually the legal status of the space was never resolved. So since 2007, this space is being object of various different confrontations, struggles to legalize the position of the space and to legalize its status. Actually, at some point, city delegated the governance of the space to the youth center, Dom Omladine in Belgrade, which was in charge for management of the space, but it was actually used by the organizations from independent scene. But then the status started being threatened by the city, but also by new management of youth center. So a variety of different struggles started for the space to keep its own purpose as a space for independent scene. And in 2014, Association Independent Cultural Scene of Serbia got involved in these struggles to legalize the status of the space, but also to develop a new management and governance model of the space. So in 2014, we organized this association. At that time, I was the president of the steering committee of Association Independent Cultural Scene of Serbia. So I was directly involved in those struggles and actually in the articulation of the model of how the space will be used. The space is relatively big. It has different, let's say it has a very developed structure. In terms of infrastructure was falling apart, as you might imagine, old public companies that were not invested or used. So, but it has variety of different spaces, and it's been used as a hall for contemporary dance organizations, for artists, as a workshop space, and had as a cinema space, exhibition space, production space, public event space for various different contents and variety of different programs. And when we started this struggle, we actually were influenced by the model of Pogon that Mirela is now sitting in as a resource center for the scene. So we decided that it would be good not to make it into some kind of curatorial run space or defined program space, but as a resource center for the scene, so that everybody who needs space for production or exhibition or presentations can use actually the space of magazine under certain conditions. And at that time, we used the model of open calendar that was developed by Pogon. I presume you spoke about it in the previous sessions. And the number of users started growing. So since 2014, so the legal status was never resolved. We actually managed to enter various different spaces that were not used up till 2014 or were used occasionally, which is also another space in Kraljevića Marka Street, which was turned into Ostavinska Galerija. And also a practice, a big workshop space, which was also part of the complex that wasn't used up till 2014. But the legal status of all those spaces was never resolved, but also city withdrew in their attempts to kind of overtake the space and turn it into some space for different use. So we managed to defend the space, but still magazine has no defined legal status. But it's kind of some silent agreement from the city and from the relevant institutions that nobody actually is trying to object current status of the space. And there was several attempts for them to expel the organizations from the space, but the growing number of the users actually helped that those campaigns in defending the space were successful. So the space was used by various different organizations, open for variety of different programs and forms of artistic practice, and the number of users started growing up till 2019. And in 2019, the users of the space actually decided to come to form a working group, and I was the member of that working group. There was quite a few people involved in this working group that was in charge to redesign the model of governance, management, and using model of the magazine according to the newly developed conditions with a large number of users. So in discussions with the users and through mapping of the actual situation at the time that the working group was working, which was 2019. And we published we published our results in the publication magazine. And we actually created a structure, management structure of the space. So the space still functions as a resource center for everybody interested. The more you can use the space for one-off, once in 5 years, and then you're occasional user. But if you're a regular user, then you become a member of, let's say, assembly of magazine. And this assembly, this body, is actually governing body and makes all decisions related to the future development of the magazine. And magazine started actually developing various different resources, apart from spatial resources. Also some equipment fund was actually created, and also tools for workshops. And then it needed some sort of model or regulation of how all those spaces, and who is managing, who is taking care, who is maintaining the space, how the space is being promoted, how the space is being programmed. There were several, let's say, joint communal actions, like working actions for cleaning the space, working actions for really actually infrastructural works on the space. So the co-work space was created as a shared office space for all the people from independent scene who needs a space. As an office space, one space was adapted for this purpose. So actually, in the past few years, magazine was improved on the level of infrastructure quite significantly. And I must emphasize, mostly due to the enthusiasm of the users, and also some grants were secured for these various different actions. So at the moment, magazine actually became some sort of a common space, joint space, which is being defined by the practice of the users. So assembly, which all the users constitute assembly, and they have regular meetings deciding on accepting new users, new members of the assembly, but also defining the future programs and actions within the space, and also dealing with the relevant issues or situations that occur during the time that during the like practice or everyday practice of using the space of magazine. Since the new model was established, so apart from assembly, there is coordinational body, which is actually body that communicates between the assembly of magazine and the board of Association Independent Cultural Scene of Serbia, because with this redesigning the model up till this point, association was sort of acting as a governing body of the space, but we wanted to make the transition so that the magazine constitutes itself as its own governing body. So it's sort of transition process where association is in its process of withdrawal, and the magazine is in the process of constitution, some legal body which will be in future in charge, fully in charge for management, governing, and development of the center. So apart from assembly and this coordination body, there is also several working groups. There is always one coordinator of the magazine, which is being elected from the assembly, and it's a rotational position. So the position of coordinator lasts for a month. So every organization that is using magazine has to delegate at certain point someone to be coordinator for a month, and the position of coordinator is essential for communicating with the new potential users, people who are interested to use the space, but also for everyday situations that arise in the center itself. other working groups are related to the maintenance of the equipment, maintenance of the space, PR and promotion of the magazine, production of the documentation of all the programs in the magazine. And I think that's about it. And it's also the members of those working groups are rotational positions. So all the users at certain point go through all processes or participate in various different formats of a governing body of the magazine. So this model was introduced in 2019, so 1 year ago, and since then it seems that it's actually working quite successfully. It is improving all the time. The users are investing back in space, and and it's becoming more and more interesting model. There are more and more international researchers coming to research the model of magazine, doing various different analyses of how this model, whether this model is successful or not. But as from our own experience and the experience of the users at the moment, it seems that it develops independently, and it is actually quite successful model of governing this type of space.
It does sound, Milica, it does sound like from a person, coming from my perspective as a person who was involved in together with you and organizations like Cooperativa, we were involved in we were just involved in magazine, like in what is happening with that space, and it was seeing it now, like in comparison to 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. It sounds like a very mature situation, like that you have reached a model that is uniquely yours. That's what it sounds to me. But we will get more into detail. As it sounds to me, it sounds very exciting, because I didn't know that you have a new managing model. So yeah, we will get more into detail later. But for now, thank you, Milica. I would just like to hear a bit from Iskra, if that's all right, Iskra, about what's going on in Skopje and how, like a small portion of what's going on recently, and maybe how things were in development also for. As far as I know, like for years now. So what's happening in Skopje?
Yeah, it was for years. I will try to give an overview of somehow on the actual things which were happening and on the, let's say, ideological and political perspectives. So with this formal establishment of Jadro Association of the Independent Cultural Center in 2012, we initiate as one of our primary goals to work towards establishing a hybrid non-profit cultural institution. That was the main goal. Established on the basis of public-civil partnership. For such an ambitious goal, Jadro found a viable partner in that period in the municipality of Center in Skopje. And in March 2015, formally, so it was 2013, when we started to negotiate and to explain the model supported by Croatian independent culture scene, by Teodor Celakovski, Emina Višnić, and everybody who are there. But in March 2015, formally we announced our joint cooperation towards reaching the goal with the public presentation and debate over the concept of the future institution. As I said, I will try to give a general overview of the idea behind the socio-cultural space Center Jadro, the first of its kind in Macedonia, in North Macedonia, which after a lengthy administrative process of almost 4 years, in September 2017, was registered in the Central Registry of the Republic of Macedonia as a formal institution entity. So we have now this formal status. The center is physically placed in the very center of Skopje, but let's say on margins of that center, where is no other cultural content, and this is for us extremely important thing. It used to be abandoned old urban community center, which was out of function. Now it's function, and everybody can check what is how it looks now on the website of the Sociocultural Space Center Jadro. One of the key signs that culture is based, I think, on the premises of togetherness, commons, and nurturing is the decentralization of the power of decision making. And that is exactly the most important mission of the independent culture sector, and most difficult mission, because it's not easy we are always asking the institutions, the federal institutions to do those processes, but it's not easy also for us to demonopolize the distribution of power in the sphere of sociocultural context and create ground for the collaborative and collective notions of critically minded culture production to flourish. These processes can further help us experience culture as a form of nourishment, a complex social practice that deals with the growth and the becoming of the aesthetic, artistic, but also in political articulations of everyday life. And this is the very core meaning of those kind of socioculture centers. Center Jadro is first and foremost a collaborative initiative and the first of its kind in Macedonia. As an institutional model, of course, it follows the example of Pogon in Zagreb, Croatia, and it similarly to start it as a result of a need for the independent art sector to have a space that will respond to the collective ideas without necessarily being particularly well situated to replace the white cube of the performance for all contemporary forms of creative production. Ideologically, the institution was envisioned and ultimately constituted around the concept of collective and communal cooperation and action, organically connecting the civil sector, the local government, and the citizens. The kind of cooperation is not only possible, but also very much the future of sustainable culture, social and political inclusiveness, and democracy. In the society as the North Macedonia is, we strongly and urgently need the deep reformative process of culture institutions, which are, of course, non-functional. So Centar Jadro is small step in that direction, but in my opinion, of crucial meaning. One of the key questions has always been what is that we want to redefine with this kind of model. So with this initiative, we would like to redefine not only culture, but also economical and political and other needs of the independent culture sector, but also the functions and structures inherent in the political discourse, detecting and working on addressing the way their performance presupposes efficiency, mobility, autonomy, transparency, and decentralization, and in turn affects the greater democratic capital, let's say, of society. As a place, it needs to respond, as a physical space, it needs to respond to our need to freely express contemporary socioculture practices and create autonomous, self-organized content that will articulate our social, intellectual, critical, and creative capital. Furthermore, Sociocultural Space Center Jadro shows a stable and autonomous development and physical space in the material structure of the city as an important new neurologic point of the critical culture production. It also plays an extremely important role in this very moment, even in this COVID crisis, where things are going online mostly. So even in this period, it also plays an extremely important role on symbolic level, that is in the production of communication of meanings, a place circulating the dynamic change of social and political flows, evident in the ideas. It will welcome in its closely curated public programs. The new model of the institution we proposed is important for cultural development, but also for education, the development of critical culture, and the new forms of socioculture communities. As this model is based on a partnership between the local government and the civil society, made up of organizations, individuals, and informal groups, the management is based on the democratic governance model. With this model, there is a substantial decentralization of power and the limited capacity for the practices of political party influences, which is dominant for our political culture. It is the only way to create organizational and program autonomy in the activities in the sphere of culture with the civil sector, but also wider. So through this format, basic resource and institutional stability is ensured. We believe that it's like that, as well as participation in management. This model ensures long-term sustainability, resulting from public infrastructure support on the one hand, and independent programming and participatory decision-making on the other. Centar Jadro has core team of 3 employees: manager Jasmina Bilalović, program coordinator Đorđe Jovanović, and administrative coordinator Georgi Pulevski, and 3 of them are coming from Association Jadro. The core team is responsible, of course, for administrating the venue and programming, which is done in accordance to the identified needs of the community. The center has governing board of 3 members, 2 of which are delegated by each of the institution of co-founders. In the current first composition of the governing board, the 3rd board member comes from the broader civic sector. The institution has also a program council, an advisory body with 2 years mandate. The ultimate goal of Jadro in this cooperation with the municipality is strengthening the independent culture sector as a social sediment that exists as a network, a web that rhizomatically kind of spreads through various relations in society in a friendly manner, entering into solidarity with other guilds and associations in the region. Centar Jadro, I would say, is designed as a dynamic nucleus which aims to become a point for development of critical culture dedicated to the wider social needs. Its program, which is open for the artists, culture workers, but also to community, creates a scenery through which the Centar Jadro can be recognized as a driving force in the dynamization of the whole culture production, with great emphasis on the development process of culture policies. The independent culture sector in its whole and the Centar Jadro itself as well is recognized as a space for new models of culture production and intersectoral cooperation. And this is very important that we are forcing this intersectoral cooperation. It features organizational dynamism and flexibility, and above all, direct engagement and action in the community, as well as a wider understanding of the space and the notion of culture. Characteristic is the simultaneous action in all segments of socio-cultural context, in different spheres of culture and culture policies, and mutual creative connection, whereby the characteristic of wider social awareness and orientation towards building new modern policies in different segments of culture is exceptionally present and dominant in art and society, both on a theoretical and activist level. This kind of institution is the first one, as I said, of its kind in Macedonia, which is recognized as mobilizing social and political nucleus. In a word, it's about community space that produce social goods, let's say, through direct democracy. What is innovative in the organizational structure, at least for Macedonia, is a democratization of resource management in the culture that rests on the principle of co-managing, sharing of responsibility, and co-ownership. This involves reliance on resources from the public domain for the development of civil society, whereby resources remain in the public domain but are not controlled by the authorities. And this is what is maybe the most important thing. Centar Jadro is not defined exclusively according to aesthetic criteria, I mean its program, but also according to socially relevant topics, and is therefore not bridged with sound programming. That program boundaries are dedicated to the mission of the organization and remain inclusive and never exclusive. And lastly, that the content is multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, where contemporary culture and art, socio-cultural activities, work with communities, and encouraging a critical culture will be able to flourish and become core value of not only the space, but of our society as a whole. Ideally, we see our center functioning polylocationally in the future, having more elaborate spatial and technical resources, as well as even bigger human capacities. And the idea behind this vision for the future is to both meet the needs of the independent culture scenes practitioners from different disciplines, as well as to host activities and events with bigger number of community and audience. We see the upcoming local elections in 2021 as an opportunity to pursue the vision for future development. However, strong advocacy process is needed in this direction. So for now, this is what I would say, and we will see if something else is needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iskra. I know it's very challenging to sum up all the history of Jadro and all the challenging moments that were there in just 10 to 15 minutes. So I know that you have a lot more to say, but we will get into our discussion later. For now, I would like Ares to give us a short presentation, and then we will go into the Q&A session, as I already have so much questions, and I'm sure our audience has too.
Thank you, Mirela. I'm representing Lombardi Foundation, which is in its 6th year of operation. However, the space that we are managing is actually the historic Lombardi Cinema, which opened its doors in 1952. Do you hear me? In 1952, as an...
Yes, we do. Sorry, Aris. Yes, we can hear you.
As a cinema, and it was a socially owned enterprise. In 1959, it got a 800-meter square garden cinema, an open-air cinema, and it operated until 99 with different stages and forms in its history. Besides being a cinema, it also was used as for certain concerts and performances, but however, cinema was the main function. after 99 and the war, basically the whole enterprise was unable to continue work as usual, because all channels of communication were broken with rest of Yugoslavia, so they could bring in films only from Albania, and Albania was back then much further than today in terms of infrastructure. And also 35mm films were not really feasible and sustainable way to keep the cinema. So in a couple of years' time, it fell into decay, and basically the collective gave up, and it became privatized in a way that the workers used it as an old man's club. But what was an interesting act was that 3 years later, in 2002, grassroots organization came up. A group of friends organized a documentary and short film festival called DokuFest, which was also a call to bring back cinema to a city of cinephiles, to the town of Prizren, which is also the second city, as opposed to Belgrade, Skopje, or Zagreb, in a way that suffered a lot from internal migration and so on. And with DokuFest, there was the first kind of public appeal for bringing back Lombardy cinema, but also a wave of small festivals and some kind of independent cultural scene emerged. This attracted the attention of then Mayor of Prizren in 2007, who decided to make an executive order to demolish Lombardy cinema, to make a way for a parking lot, which mobilized the campaign of DokuFest, and then a very new organization called Ecman Društvo, which is an urban activist organization, but made a profile in preserving heritage also and urban commons. And in a few days, about 8,000 signatures were gathered, and this process was temporarily stopped. And there were also local elections coming up, and the mayor lost the race. However, there was no capacity to follow up. The organizations were all in their very early stages of development, and it was a big infrastructure, like 1,500 meters square space, and very damaged infrastructure with so many legal and other problems, but also basically lack of capacity to follow up on it. However, this provoked a moment when civic activism and culture started to function in around the same discussions in Prizren, and this resulted eventually that by 2012 a network of cultural organizations was formed locally in parallel to the one established nationally. So there was an increased activism around the spaces. However, this didn't prevent authorities from deciding to privatize Lombardy cinema in 2014 to pave way for it to become a shopping mall and a parking lot again. It was, other than this real estate and kind of political economy perspective, there was an ideological perspective also, because it was a Yugoslav heritage, and also very much associated with 90s and pornography, which was kind of changed its publicness or made it a different public in a different way. However, in 2014, we were lucky enough that the privatization agency started three weeks ahead of the film festival, which created an ideal platform to oppose the privatization process and generated the action of 58 non-profits from all around Kosovo, led by the same two organizations, DokuFest and Ecman Društvo, and the local network of cultural organizations that opposed the privatization, and also filed a formal nomination for the cinema to enter the cultural heritage list, which eventually became the formal way of preserving or stopping the privatization process, which also signed the first time the privatization process was stopped after the war in Kosovo. After some sitting at the table with authorities, after a lot of advocacy and noise, around February 15, an agreement was reached in principle with the Ministry of Culture and the privatization agency that the cinema wouldn't be privatized and that it would go towards becoming a public property. with some kind of multi-stakeholder involvement that wasn't clearly defined, but that it would be run by a new entity that would be established by those who was running the initiative, and that became basically Lombardi Foundation. And it had that took the cinema on 1 year deal with a privatization agency. This year is the 6th time that we did the same 1 year deal. With the building being dilapidated, we had one, let's say, weakness. There was a weak, let's say, organizational infrastructure in the city in 2015. So we couldn't maintain the same large community in building up the space. And in a way, it was then thrown into an organization whose mandate was to keep all parties involved in the process of rethinking the model, of improving the infrastructure, carrying on with the legal procedure, defining the programmatic model, the economic model, and all of that. So we started small with a few volunteers and myself back then, but with a lot of support of some organizations that were involved in the campaign to revitalize a very small part of administrative part of the building gradually in 2015, open it up to different forms of programs, mainly film and music, but then also some talks and trying to attract as many groups as possible so that in a way we continue our advocacy because the battle was far from over. And our first success was to secure funding to restore the roof of the cinema, which came in 2016, that saved the building that was falling into pieces, literally. So until 2017, it was kind of an emergency state. And apart from running the space and trying to partially improve it, we were in parallel running a multi-stakeholder group that involved the Ministry of Culture, the representatives of municipality, of the key organizations involved in the campaign to devise a management plan for the site. The management plan is usually a type of plan used for heritage sites governance, and it would basically lead define the functions, it would define the preservation guidelines, how it would be restored and how it would be managed and how it would be run, even though it never became a formal document or a formal, let's say, a formal document. It was one way to keep all parties involved and have an overall agreement about the direction and the use and the function of the space, but it still meant that the Lombardi Foundation was to do the job in terms of carrying with goals. And this meant trying to convince governments. We convinced once to make this a public property from one that's administered by a privatization agency. But because we changed 4 governments in 5 years, it was always blocked. The process of completing the transfer was blocked, and it was a lot of back and forths. In the spatial aspect, the site became a common resource that was used and administered by Lombardi Foundation, who did maybe half of the programming, that from 2007 to 2019 counted about 100 public programs in the year, and another 100 more loosely organized by about 50 other users annually, most of which were not paid or made sort of provided for free, while in some cases it would be also rent would be applied when the conditions permitted or the event was funded by some party. And this in a way also helped a little bit sustain and maintain the place because of its high maintenance costs. In terms of participation in the governance model, we did look very much into different forms, be it Pogon, and we had a lot of support and a lot of cooperation either through Cooperativa or directly with individuals involved in these processes, as many of you know. However, we went forward with this model because legally it was not yet formulated. So now it's still an open question about how it's going to be governed in the future. One proposition that came from the multi-stakeholder group was that it would, in the long run, should continue for 15 years to be governed by Lombardi Foundation. However, to have a supervisory body that has representatives of the local, the central level, and independent culture. From the local scene that would annually or twice in the year evaluate if we are fulfilling the management plans, priorities, or annual plan of the management plan. However, from a legal point of view, this is going to be a new sort of structure body. It's not foreseen. So in the next 3-4 months, we will be figuring that out, because in the meantime, we did secure capital investment to do whole restoration of the building. The European Union pledged close to 1 million euros for the full restoration. That means that the space can be used 12 months a year for multiple functions, because now the main hall can be used from May until September, and we have only a smaller space that's used throughout the year. What happened in parallel was that, on one hand, we worked in the programming and establishing the programmatic identity of Lombardi Foundation that has parts that deal with kind of more critical understanding of 20th century through cultural history, because it became, which was a result of our trying to understand the history of the cinema itself, because there is a total amnesia, no whatsoever institutional work or academic work in the field, and it's an erased, unwanted part of history, the second part of the 20th century, and it kind of defined the development of the organization, and we established a kind of research unit that it has a social scientist mainly, who then whose research becomes a public program, an exhibition, a talk, a publication, and different types of output. And there is a more disciplinary part that has mainly music and film in form of programs, in forms of screenings, performances, and more educational activities in the on the site. And in parallel, we had this strong connection with the local independent cultural network, ROC, which is an informal entity. However, is now in a registration process, but was administered on rotationally by local organizations. And in the last 2 mandates, the Lombardi Foundation did administer the network, and the network led 2 policy-making processes in Prizren. One was to make a local cultural plan, 2017-2020, and the other was to make a management plan for the historic center of Prizren.
Aris, I'm going to have to stop you. Aris, I'm going to have to stop you here, because we will have time to. But you did. I mean, like, the crucial points that I wanted to sort of hear about the cinema is we did hear, I hope, here also. Guys, Milica, Iskra, I just want to give an opportunity to our listeners. I can't see how many there are. Let me just try to see this differently, gallery view. Okay, and I want to see if there are maybe questions for our speakers, because this is now a time that I would like to open up a Q&A session, just because to get out of this format of listening to presentations and to go into our open discussion. So are there any questions? If there are questions on Zoom, if you would like to raise a question on Zoom, just raise your hand. That's an option you have here. And yes, you can physically raise your hand if you have any questions. Okay, so I have a lot of questions. So I would like to start, I would just sort of like to, before I go into questions, I would just like what I heard from each and one of you is that every process that we have here, and I don't know if it's a Balkan thing, but it's just that every process that we have here was a struggle. There was some sort of struggle to get to the space. There was some sort of struggle in communicating what we want, and there was some sort of fighting over what we want, what kind of infrastructure it is, why it should be a very specific kind of model that would like a management model, very specific kind of management model that would be involved in managing these buildings and in these infrastructure, which I think is very valuable. And what I also just wanted to reflect upon is that although I knew this, listening to you and each and every one of you saying that Pogon had an influence on your processes and it was sort of an inspiration, is just, once again, when you hear it, is huge, because it's not just that we're talking about it locally, that Pogon had an influence on our social cultural centers here in Croatia, but it also created this larger impact where, for example, we heard Magazine was started with one model of an open calendar, and today they have a completely new model, so it transformed, which is, I think, also very big and very exciting to hear. So Milica, if you would like to just maybe, I'm curious about like this new model. I mean, you said that it's working. I'm not sure where Milica.
I'm here. Do you hear me?
Yeah, you're here. I just don't see a video of you. Wait, hold on. Gallery view. Oh, there you are.
Yeah. Well, I would say, I mean, it is, this point that you raised is important, and it was obviously one collective regional process, I must say. And it's been, like process starting from 2004 onwards, where various different actors that had collaborative programs that collaborated in the region. And when we say region, at this time when we got together in 2004, it was the region of ex-Yugoslavia, because there were existing collaborations, program collaboration between various different organizations from the cultural civil sector or independent scene, whichever way you want to call it. And these collaborative regional processes that we all went together, one of the part of those processes was also establishing Cooperativa as a regional platform for culture that we are all we are all members of and one of the founders of. And all the discussions linked and issues and challenges that we were encountering throughout the past more than a decade was, I would say, shaped our struggles and our ideas in which directions we want to go. And I can also say that it was a sort of collaborative process, and we learned from each other, we helped each other, and Cooperativa was did represent some sort of a point where we could all come together. But also not only that, but Magazine itself was supported by RegLab, one Cooperativa program, in several campaigns which were organized in Magazine to defend the space and to maintain its independent position, and so and also those joint discussions and experiences that we have when we would meet together, and the similar situations related to the working conditions, production conditions, spatial politics, cultural politics, institutional politics, were all, I would say, very similar challenges that we were going through. So this experience of exchanging ideas, supporting each other, empowering each other in various different struggles, and then adapting this knowledge to the local situation and developing something adequate for the local needs and for the local situation was, I would say, a collaborative process or process. And so establishing of Magazine was very much a collaborative process which came out of this regional experience and knowledge that we gained through collaboration. And also a similar thing was, we can also say for Centar Jadro in Macedonia, I would say, but also with Ares's various different development phases with Lombardi Foundation. And yes, Pogon was the starting point, I would say, of inspiration.
But I find it also interesting. I find it also interesting, Milica, that we are now I think we're sort of in a situation where Pogon has also this opportunity to learn from the cultural centers in the region who are very localized and they're very, very much in their own context, which I think can be a learning point also for Pogon. For example, when you say that this is something that stuck with me, when you say that right now magazine is being defined by the practice of its users. I think that's such a wonderful practice. I'm just curious about what do you think the perspective is of this, like in developing this model? What do you think the perspective is? And I'm also the thing that I'm always curious about, because we are a part of the independent culture in Balkans. I'm curious about what all of you think, not just Milica. I think I'm curious about what Iskra thinks and what Aris thinks. What are our perspectives in sustainability of these models, and what are our perspectives in the infrastructure itself? Because this is now, for example, we see this. We at Pogon, like me from Operation City, that we are co-managing this building, we see the maintaining of the infrastructures of the independent cultural scene as a huge challenge. So Aris, you already said that you gained the capital investment. I think that's an enormous step towards sustainability. I just hope that it doesn't go in the direction of privatization, Lord forbid. No, I really, once something becomes really pretty, it can't be ours anymore. I'm of course going overboard. But yes, so I'm curious what you guys think about perspectives and about sustainability. Milica, you can continue, then we can go on to other speakers.
Okay. We are talking about institutional innovation. We are talking about reinventing institutions. We are talking about changing habits. We are talking about emancipation, political emancipation, governing emancipation. Those changes I would say, are quite influential. It's not something we can find traces, historical background of this type of models, and we can go back to self-governing systems and so on and so on. But still, I would say that in new circumstances, in new environments, I would say from the development phases from 2014 till 2019, and then redefining the model by the new situation from 2019, how this model actually functions up till now, it's growing. I would say magazine is growing. It is up till now, it proved to be very successful. There are more and more people interested to become part of, to use space. The space is improving. It's not deteriorating. It's improving by the capacities of all people involved. It's improving on the level of infrastructure as well. Some new financial potentials are being opened. Magazine recently, first grant that magazine got as for some sort of reconstruction, modest reconstruction of the infrastructure was a few years ago from Fund Action, but recently magazine got quite significant grant from European Endowment for Democracy. So this type of model is actually being seen as some interesting example practicing democratic principles. So that gives magazine some new possibilities, which we will see how they're going to develop. But I believe we cannot predict the development. I believe there is a good atmosphere, and this magazine community grows. And the improvements in the governing model, in the building trust among the community and members of the assembly, and experience that people are gaining through participating in this process, I think it's empowering for everybody who take part. So I believe that magazine will be, I think there is quite a good perspective for it regarding sustainability. I believe that can be also a good example for research. How can we create sustainable models that can develop themselves,
which we
but
will,
also everybody who are involved.
Which we had some ideas, maybe we can come back to that later, about researching and then doing source books on some issues, which we can mention later. Iskra and Ares, I would like to hear your thoughts, your perspectives on sustainability. And I don't mean, like, I really don't mean it in a project sense, like the answer you would give when you're writing a project application, like we will be sustainable, we will fundraise, we will like involve, but what you actually think is the key aspect. How do you ensure sustainability, and can sustainability be ensured without continuing this struggle that we were talking about earlier? Yeah, Iskra, you can.
Thank you. This is the most difficult question.
I know, right?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I hear sustainability, then, but in the whole unstable world in which we are living on a political, societal level, on cultural level, I think that this should be at least a small spot for showing how things should be developed to the sustainable direction. Why I'm thinking, why I'm emphasizing this? Because as I mentioned in my presentation, I believe that this is not something huge which happened. But for example, in societies like Macedonian is, for example, where everything is suffocated somehow, where everything is put on the margins, even the so-called elite things are put on the margins, where the institutions are devastated. We have suddenly, where the particular interests are the main aim for everybody because of the bare life, because of the existential problems, because of the economical devastation. Then we have this model which shows that intertwining between almost completely different nucleus is possible for building the common good. So besides all those things which I mentioned in my presentation, which Milica mentioned and Arens mentioned, which are democratization, emancipatory processes, education, creating a new political culture, I think that the sustainable thing, not only in economical, in financial meaning, is to build the community based on solidarity of intersectional working on, I don't know, on openness, deconstructing the meaning of power, of political power, because those maybe I'm too utopistic and idealistic.
No, I agree. I agree absolutely, Iskra. It's just that when we come, we came to the very nucleus of it, and yes, it is always about power. And why these processes last so long is because people are unwilling to redistribute power, and this is something that we need to learn, and this is something that we are learning in this process, like participatory processes, as we know, and co-managing models are exactly redistribution of power. But also, and here I would also like to ask Ares something. It's also a question of responsibility. right? And Aris, this is a question that I have for you. Is well, it's basically two questions. One is, how do you like this cinema, and now you have this capital investment. How do you ensure? That it remains public, that it remains in the hands of that it sort of remains a public good, and who do you think is responsible for it to remain that? And who do you think is responsible for further development of participatory models, even once it becomes a building that gets how many million euros you said of investment? This will be, for example, this will be in the region of Southeast Europe. I think it will be a pioneering effort to put that much, to have a capital investment in something that we call a socio-cultural center in this region.
Well, I mean, it's a good responsibility, it's a good topic, and I think title for this type of context. And yes, it is a very unique situation, but even the capital funding came as a result of advocacy to the European Union. So it was basically us and another partner of ours, it's Mreža, advocating for, in parallel, for neighborhoods in the historic center that we were working to preserve, and about the cinema. And it took a lot of, it was because of making the case public in a way, and also using different political tactics and pitching and different other forms that we did secure, but it takes perseverance. We started this dialogue with the European Union in a formal capacity in mid-2016. We are now in February 20, or we are not in February 20, where are we?
We're post-corona, Aris.
September 20. I mean, the construction and restoration work is currently scheduled to begin in March 22. And, you know, basically this must be over in 23. So it takes 10 years to build this thing. So it takes you at least a few crazy people who, you know, are committed for, let's say, 10 years. If it's not a big community that you let the community take over. But in our case, it's also prime real estate in the heart of the city. It's really a very risky situation. So the point of who takes responsibility in this particular case is very important. And in this sense, we established a foundation and are making it stronger in a way. And even if not on legal grounds, we are nobody that can be kicked out from a legal point of view at any minute, you know. At least in the, having a public support and generating that sort of public support is the responsibility of the organization, and it's our only way of making sure that this remains public even after that. So it means our attitude and our behavior as the people who took the responsibility will define if we get it when it's needed. So it's not only about making a participatory process around a management plan and convincing different parties in chipping in the money and, you know, running the operation, but also finding and strengthening the capacity in order to be able to practice the publicness, whatever that is, be it from the transparency of the organization to how decisions are made, or what type of content is allowed, or how different requests are taken into account, or, you know, how the restoration is done and what it means for the physical space whom we try to preserve because of its part in the collective memory, and so on and so forth. So there are different fragments. And then there is also, in a broader sense, because there is a new reality of spaces in Kosovo that starts more or less or has a run in the years 2015, 16, 17, when now you have 3 other cases of cinemas run as a sort of social cultural spaces.
It's spread.
Peja and Pristina, and there are other commoning that are loosely linked to each other, but we talk with each other about it, and we are all in very weak grounds in certain way and very strong position on the other way. On the other hand, so it will be also, do we engage in collective solutions in a grander scale, or we say each has a particular particularity to itself, and then we try to solve one by one. And well, there are many other questions about sustainability, but I'll stop here before you stop me.
Yeah, but I just think that I find it interesting that each one of you has a perspective of this new development model and where it will go, and everyone has a perspective of, like, has at least an idea of sustainability. And I'm not talking about just exclusively financial or economic stability. I'm also talking about institutional stability, like the model that we developed. And this is going to be my last question, because I think people are starting to lose focus. But I'm very curious about what you think that the models that we developed in culture that then spread to other areas of work and acting. Do you think that, because we were talking about democratization, do you think that we can, especially having in mind this regional perspective, I mean, we are getting more and more networked, all of us, and we have this organization called Cooperativa that is a regional platform for culture that is gathering like all the more important organizations in Southeast Europe. I'm wondering, what do you think the perspectives is that we cause this ripple effect, like maybe long term, of democratization of other public goods that are not just in culture? Do you think that we can influence that long term? Whoever wants to. Maybe I'm being utopic now.
I just wanted to point one very important, which I forgot to say, which is one very important characteristic of magazine. There is not one employee in magazine. So just to be clear, nobody is employed there. There is no one employee. No, not one person is employed. All those rotational positions, depending on the available funds, are being paid on the amount that the assembly decide, but there is no one employee, and that model functions. When we say to people, oh, how do you mean, how can it work when there is nobody, there is no one person manager or coordinator employed, and it's functional. So that's maybe one important characteristic just to emphasize. And regarding your question, how do we influence other aspects of social life beyond cultural production? I mean, it would be huge success if we could influence a little bit, change in cultural policies. But my experience being active in independent cultural scene, many struggles and many issues and many new ideas actually derived from the independent cultural centers. Many movements derived from the independent cultural scenes, like Right to the City movement in Zagreb. Pravo na grad, and Don't Drown Belgrade. It was initiated by Ministry of Space, who is member of Association Independent Cultural Scene of Serbia. So those struggles are connected, I would say. And magazine as such is also this, as Iskra mentioned, this intersectorial approach. It is also interesting which type of practices are being exercised in magazine, and which type of organizations are, for example, during COVID time, lockdown, magazine was used, and it was, I would say, consensual decision by the assembly to give magazine as a space for using for Solidarity Kitchen, organizations who were providing meals for people in need. So they used magazine as a storage. So it was because it was not possible to use it as any kind of space for live events. So there is, and also within that center, a lot of, let's say, organizations who are fighting for rights, for introducing cycling paths in Serbia. Organizations who are fighting ecological organizations, various different human rights organizations, various different organizations dealing with urban policies, rights for housing, and so on and so on. So I believe that within independent cultural sector, the capacity to communicate, to create dialogue, collaborations, exchanges, and some sort of collective actions between various different actors on the scene invested in introducing change in the current dominant hegemonic politics is taking place. So I believe whether it's in influence of independent cultural scene or other people influence independent cultural scene, but I think it's all connected. But you can see strong collaborations and joint actions by various different actors, I would say, in most of the countries of our region.
That's true, and which I think maybe is one of our biggest social capital moments that we have, is this networking and just ripple effect that we have coming from independent culture to other areas. Iskra, what do you think? Are we going back to redistribution of power?
Always. I agree with everything which Milica said, but what I think it's the huge success will be if we, especially in Macedonia, if we succeed to influence the cultural sector, first of all, to influence and to advocate for reforming somehow the concept of culture institutions, and not only the culture institutions but cultural practices, how to distribute the content and the organization of that content and the process of production, which is quite retrograde somehow in the culture institutions. And then to influence, to advocate in general the reading of culture, what culture means, that culture is a public good, and that it doesn't exist for a small group of well-educated people who are I don't know what, and that it is something which can be political with the political relevance. And then so it's a quite complicated process, especially here. And then I hope that we can start some other emancipatory processes of changes which will influence the politics and policies on some more general level. We are starting to do something like that. We are involved in different processes. We are trying to involve not only the politicians but the whole society in some processes which will open the window towards the responsibility of our responsibility of the citizens for everything which is happening in the society. So I can't say that it will be something which will happen suddenly tomorrow or next year, but it's a process. And I would say thanks to Cooperativa and thanks to our let's say politics of friendship, let's say of our politics of friendship, we can develop and manage, we can develop ourselves and our acting in the society faster somehow.
Yeah, and I would just like to reiterate what Milica said, is that we can, I think these processes act empowering on all of us when we see how Pogon influenced not just here our local scene, but went out regionally. I think it's very encouraging and it's very empowering. And I'm sorry, Aris, I tend to talk too much sometimes, so can I please hear your thoughts on our perspectives, especially regarding regional cooperation and our social cultural centers?
Well, I think...
do we network too much, Aris? What do you think?
Do we network too much?
Do we network too much? We have a lot of networks here locally.
we do have a lot of networks, but I think even if some are dormant or not always very dynamic or always there, they are very essential to, first of all, this distribution of knowledge and learning is, I think, a key part of it, because we are working and sometimes too immersed in the micropolitics, and then some big wave hits and everything suddenly changes or the dynamics change. But however, that knowledge is still useful in renegotiating our positions sometimes, even if it seems like it's some sandcastles coming down and you having to start from the beginning. The situations that come up are inevitable, but the knowledge generated is critical and maybe one of the biggest assets of this whole process. And I really wonder what is happening, if there is a generational gap, or if that is going to happen with the ones that are coming, the newcomers or new organizations or youth in regional cooperation. Also, from thinking also from a perspective of having a new political region named Western Balkans that is has different limitations, and also from the point of view of Kosovo in this case, where there was always less and less cooperation. However, there are some positive kind of new friendships and alliances that basically also happened through Cooperativa and through the very same network. So the next 2-3 years are going to be really interesting to see, and also how this spatial and travel limitations that come from Corona that might affect the next 2 years, how are they going to affect us? We already don't have a physical assembly this year. It's great that we get to talk here, but I think even these moments of being for 3 days together with each other, in the case of Cooperativa, in one of the capitals or one of the cities, was an essential part of the year of getting together or talking physically and in a more relaxed manner rather than our intensive board meetings or other platforms. So it will be, I mean, it will be up to us in how we manage to still find space and different, meaning and ways of keeping in touch and supporting each other throughout these times. So, I mean, I put out a lot of things at the same time, but because there is a lot of things when in terms of regional cooperation and in terms of perspectives of regional cooperation, not just talking about Cooperativa, but of perspectives of networking of our social cultural centers, which may one day have a life of their own, like that new, maybe new network. We'll see. I just want to make sure that you're all still alive, and that if anybody has any questions, now is the time. Otherwise, we will close the session. Let's see. Let's see. View. Yeah. Okay. Gallery view. Okay. So now we see everyone. If somebody wants to ask a question to one of our speakers, you can. No? Okay. Okay. Then I will thank. I want to thank once again Milica and Iskra and Ares. Thank you so much for participating in our panel, and I'm sure we will see each other again soon. Thank you to our audience and our participants. Thank you for all of you listening online. We are recording this, and Klubtura will let you know how you will get this video and what you can do with it. But for now, I'm closing this panel, and I think that I should give the word to organizers or am I just closing the conference? Okay, they said I should close the conference, so I'm gonna switch back to Croatian. Ares, is that okay? Just to close, okay. Ljudi, hvala vam svima puno. Nadam se da vam je bilo korisno i zanimljivo. Mi sa našim kolegama i drugarima iz regije radimo jako dugo i jako smo sretni da smo mogli s njima, da su oni mogli s vama podijeliti, da smo svi mogli čuti neka zajednička iskustva koje možda previdimo, jer se ne razgovaramo dovoljno nikad o tome što se događa u našem susjedstvu. Hvala vam na sudjelovanju na cijelom današnjem danu.
Dobit ćete svi mailove sa materijalima i objavit ćemo i neki video. I to je to za sad od nas. Završavamo konfu, a bogme i projekt i hvala vam svima još jednom. Hvala. Gasimo se.